Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining this community gathering. I wish we were gathered outside together on the quad or at an outdoor breakfast barbecue, but at least we're here together, even if it's virtual. And we have some remarkable individuals that we'll be sharing with you today. And we'll also have an opportunity for you to share your thoughts. A special thanks to Rhea and to Lash, who are joining us from California, where I remind you it is 6 a.m. Lash, if you're heading into surgery, you're going to need to get used to these hours. Today is a time to celebrate and commemorate, but it is also a time to advocate and to speak out. These past weeks have been marked by unrest, by fear, and by sadness. But there have also been moments of clarity and a few special moments for celebration. Yesterday, when Chief Justice Roberts authored the Supreme Court decision invalidating the rescission of the DACA program, well, that was one of those celebratory moments. Other celebratory moments for me have been when over the past few weeks, students, staff, faculty have shared with me their ideas for making Harvard Medical School a better place, more diverse, more inclusive, and a place where we all can feel proud to belong. The opportunity to work together with all of you to address complex challenges, to commit together to making Harvard Medical School a better place, that is my calling as dean. This morning, I read Skip Gates' essay on the origins of Juneteenth as a date to recognize and celebrate the end of slavery. He noted, of all Emancipation Day observances, Juneteenth falls closest to the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, when the sun at its zenith defies the darkness in every state, including those once shadowed by slavery. Let us today enjoy the long, long sun. Let it lighten our lives and for this day our souls, for there are many longer days ahead in the struggle that began on June 19th so many years ago. And now I want to introduce Dr. Joan Reede, the Dean for Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Partnership at Harvard Medical School. Joan is a force for change, a force for social good, and my partner. Joan.
Thank you, George. I'm so glad to be that we're able to come together today. I've attended Juneteenth celebrations in Boston for a number of years, but this is the first that brings individuals from our HMS community together. This morning marks a new dawn, a time for opening awareness, for dialogue, a time to acknowledge our individual and shared histories, as well as today's challenges, and a time for advancing racial justice with and through community. Juneteenth has become not only a time to commemorate Black liberation from the institution of slavery in the United States, but also a time to highlight the resilience, solidarity, and culture of the Black community. It is a time for Black Americans to reflect on their ancestral roots and celebrate the freedoms and lives that generations have fought to secure. In 2007, Massachusetts became the 25th state to recognize Juneteenth. The proclamation was signed by Governor Deval Patrick, the first Black governor of the Commonwealth and the only sitting Black governor at that time in the United States. We're fortunate today to have another Black governor in the making with us. The core of Juneteenth focuses around family, food, and community. And that's why we've gathered together this morning, our HMS family and community over breakfast. Juneteenth is also a time to speak out and demonstrate. It serves as a reminder of the freedoms that are yet to be reached by people of color, and as an opportunity for people to address those inequities that afflict their communities. Juneteenth serves as a celebration of the progress attained by generations fighting for freedoms and rights, and as a reminder of the work yet to come, work that is necessary to ensure a brighter, more equitable world. The march is necessary and the march must continue. Today, I'm pleased to introduce Tiara Lacey, a graduate student at HMS and a board member of the Minority Biomedical Scientists of Harvard. And we've asked her to share some of her thoughts and experiences around Juneteenth. Tiara?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Dean Reede, for your introduction. My name is Tiara Lacey, and I'm a rising third-year PhD candidate in the Biological and Biomedical Sciences program, and a member of the Harvard Lab in the Neurobiology department. What I'll say today is from the perspective of Black PhD students, thoughts from Xavier Dumaine and Alana Vandervoort and myself. Today, I would like to offer reflections on Juneteenth, and more specifically, emancipation. While we were emancipated from enslavement in 1865 with the ratification of the 13th Amendment, we were not emancipated from anti-Blackness, white supremacy, and racism. These persist in rebranded and repackaged forms, including the prison industrial complex, police brutality, and health disparities, among other injustices and inequities. I want us for the next few minutes to reimagine what equity and liberation could look like on this campus. I'm hoping you'll take away 2 points from this. 1, we are still fighting for emancipation, and 2, this fight will require everyone to act, at a minimum, within their circles of control and spheres of influence. This theme is poignantly articulated by the human and civil rights activist and leader, Coretta Scott King, who said, "Struggle is a never-ending progress. Freedom is never really won. You earn it and win it in every generation." I can see those generational victories in my own education. As a proud alumna of the illustrious Spelman College, a historically Black college and university, or HBCU, for women that was founded in 1881, which is currently my background. While HBCUs were opening their doors to Black students across the nation, Harvard closed them. In 1850, because of the pressure from white students and faculty, Harvard Medical School Dean Holmes closed the door on 3 Black students by rescinding their acceptance offers. Across the river in 1895, W.E.B. Du Bois was the first Black person to receive a PhD from Harvard, but before then, he was forced to redo his undergraduate education at Harvard College because his bachelor's degree from the HBCU Fisk was not considered legitimate. In 1898, Alberta Virginia Scott became the first Black woman to graduate from Radcliffe College because the doors of Harvard were closed to women. So it's not lost on me that being a Black woman at Harvard Medical School and the first scientist in my family is generational progress and a sign that the door is starting to crack open. There is much work needed to widen the doors of opportunity and equity at Harvard for Black people. So let us return to Coretta Scott King's words and pose the question, what would freedom look like for our generation here at Harvard? We envision a Harvard where Black students, postdocs, and tenured faculty will no longer be underrepresented on campus. A Harvard where we can pursue our educational and career goals. A Harvard without a glass ceiling or the fear that police will harm us. A Harvard that invests and elevates in health and prosperity of its neighboring Black communities. A Harvard where our Blackness and our identities could be seen and celebrated, not just tolerated. A Harvard where I won't have to continually prove that I too am a student. A Harvard where we can all thrive. We acknowledge that we are only 3 members of the Black PhD community at GSAS, and there are many others with their own stories and visions. Listen and learn from them, but also realize that the onus is on you to educate yourself on how to be anti-racist. No matter where we find ourselves at HMS, we can step up, speak up, and push for progress. Just 2 weeks ago, Black PhD students at GSAS started the Coalition for Black Lives and Match Me Harvard campaign to call on our university to take concrete actions to fight for racial justice in our community. Let's acknowledge that these aren't the first Black voices to call Harvard to action, and Black student organizers have been working on this goal for many years. Finally, we're challenging departments and programs across campus to step up and act. We cannot make progress until we work together and take action as a community and remember that 1, we are still fighting for emancipation, and 2, that this fight will require everyone to act. When we look back, we see slavery as a clear atrocity. How will history remember this moment? What will Harvard's legacy be? And what will you do today? Thank you.
Thank you, Tiara. Our next speaker is Lash Nolen, Harvard Medical School class of 2023 and the president of the Harvard Medical School Student Council. Lash?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this important celebration and day. Today, I will be performing a piece of spoken word, and that piece is called Juneteenth, a movement, not a moment. 4th of July used to be my favorite holiday. Hues of red, white, and blue, watermelon triangles, and barbecue were the highlights of my day. Fireworks would light the sky and I would feel alive. That was until I learned it was all a lie. Because the celebration that filled the air was not for me, just like it wasn't 400 years ago for my ancestors during chattel slavery, or the indigenous peoples whose land we occupy as I speak. I'll never understand why this country fails to acknowledge those they mistreat. See, July 4th, 1776 was the day they taught me to celebrate. By they, I mean my white school teachers and textbooks. Let's get that straight. It was my family who taught me that freedom for them and us did not equate, even if it was to the same God to which we both prayed. Because while white families scheduled grand dinners to commemorate their freedom, it was my ancestors who were the ones forced to feed them. For some, the Constitution was their solution, but for my people, it only solidified their inferior stature in this institution. For example, 16 years later, they were forced to build the White House, the same one 45 lives in, along with the hate so readily espoused. June 19th, 1865 was the true start to our freedom story. Today, we celebrate Juneteenth as if it's okay we waited 155 years ignoring it. Like we ignored the disruption of families, children left alone, guardians deported. This level of erasure, we can no longer condone it. While today is one of a celebratory mood, I mean, it's Juneteenth. I know my grandparents gonna get their groove. We still must remember that for true Black liberation to be achieved, there is still so much work to do. These names will remind us of that as I conclude. The Charleston Nine, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Tony McDade, Rayshard Brooks, Robert Fuller, Malcolm Harsh, Oluwatoyin Ruth Toyin Salau. May you all rest in power. Today needs to be a movement, not a moment, because July 4th never gave us our freedom and we're still waiting on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lash. I'd now like to introduce a Harvard Medical School alum and a former member of the Harvard University Board of Overseers, Woody Myers. Woody is the 2020 candidate for the governor of Indiana, and he's served in the past as a health commissioner, both for New York City and the state of Indiana. He's back at HMS today to share some of his reflections on Juneteenth and the times in which we're currently living. Woody?
Thank you very much, Dean Reede, and thank you very much, Dean Daley, for inviting me to this celebration today. I'd like to share my screen and talk a little bit about the perspective I have for this celebration today, both as a former student, as you might see in the transition to the picture of me as a freshman medical student back in the 1970s to the evolution from today to today. So I'm going to talk about the impressions of the guy on the left from the perspective of the guy now on the right. The brief discussion that I'll enter into today is titled Race and morality in medicine, a brief historical tour. So of course, in a matter of 15 minutes or so, you're not going to be able to cover a lot of ground. So I'm going to be very selective in what I talk about. With respect to Juneteenth, you all know now, given the conversation thus far, that it's a celebration at the end of slavery from Texas. The origins were seen, and unfortunately, our profession had a lot to do with slavery. The medical profession played a key role in the institution of slavery. One of its contributors was Samuel A. Cartwright, a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine. In his day, there was an active discussion between the abolitionists and those that owned slaves and profited from them. The arguments that slavery was cruel and should be abandoned were countered with the help of some physicians, including Dr. Cartwright. And thus the beginning of pseudoscience in America, because he created the theory of drapetomania, a psychiatric diagnosis of the runaway slave syndrome, a mental disorder characterized by the desire to free from servitude. He suggested African slaves possessed smaller brains, more sensitive skin, overdeveloped nervous systems, giving them an especially high propensity for servitude. And this disease was triggered by masters who unwisely treated their enslaved people as equals, and his suggested treatment options included severe whipping and perhaps amputation of the slaves' toes. In addition, during the time of the Civil War, there were slave infirmaries. These were for-profit hospitals designed to improve slave health prior to auction, and unfortunately many in our profession at the time participated actively. One was Hospital Dieu, the House of God, opened in New Orleans in 1859, founded by the Daughters of Charity. It became ultimately University Hospital over the years at LSU, and ironically was closed after Hurricane Katrina in 2015. Another such institution was Touro Infirmary, also opened in New Orleans, and this time in 1852. Today, it's a teaching hospital offering medical students and postgraduate medical training to more than 500 students, and is affiliated with LSU and Tulane University. At the Touro Infirmary, in the time of the Civil War, it cost $1 per slave per day for the slave owner to have his slave treated in the hospital. Once the treatment was completed, Touro issued a certificate or a type of warranty that guaranteed the product that was purchased from the facility. This warranty allowed someone to return an enslaved person if they were found out to be in poor health. And by the way, the warranties were sold by the chief physician of the institution. Let's fast forward from the time of slavery to the year 1974, when yours truly was a student at the Harvard Medical School, and at the time thought that I wanted to enter OBGYN as a career. So instead of doing what I should have been doing, which was to concentrate on my histology or physiology coursework, I'd hang out with house staff. I used to hang out at the Massachusetts General Hospital emergency room, and the residents and interns would take pity on me and allow me to do some suturing. And on occasion, I would also try to hang out at the Boston Lying-In Hospital in Longwood, across the street from Harvard Medical School, Vanderbilt Hall. This was the teaching hospital that had most of the obstetrics rotations in my day. Now, of course, Brigham and Women's Hospital has taken over. So I would put on my scrubs, I'd go over to the hospital, and I would try to hang out and see if I could see some deliveries, and if I got lucky to participate in one or few, and some of the residents were quite helpful and let me do that. But I also noticed that the attendings in this institution at the time weren't quite as interested in my being a part of the experience, even though I was a legitimate Harvard medical student. And I didn't know for sure if it had anything to do with the upper middle class and the Brookline patient population that frequented the institution at a time, or whether 250-pound African-American student in the labor suite was a distraction in some respects from the birth experience. I didn't quite have a diagnosis, but I decided that given that set of experiences prior to my official OB rotation, I wanted to do something else. So I had a conversation with Kenneth J. Ryan, a legend in fertility and obstetrics and gynecology, at that time the chairman of the department of OBGYN, and because I needed his signature on a form that I had to get signed in order for me to do my OB rotation outside of the Harvard system. I had my argument well prepared, and I went into Dr. Ryan's office trying to talk about my experiences, and he was having a very busy day, and about one paragraph in decided, look, if you really wanted to go, go, and sign the form in a very friendly way. And I was out, and I was allowed to do my rotation elsewhere. So a few months later, I headed out to California to the Women's Hospital in Los Angeles County, which at that time had the second highest number of births in America. And in 5 weeks, in a 5-week rotation in obstetrics, I had 55 vaginal deliveries. 100% of my patients had Spanish as their primary language. Only about 5 or so, maybe 4 of those deliveries were supervised. The rest of those deliveries was me, a nurse on most occasions, and the patient. And I did, near the end of my rotation, have a complication that I remember vividly. A woman who had a large child, and we had a shoulder dystocia, first major complication that I was aware of during this time. And I screamed for help, and just so happened the chief resident was outside the door, came in and quickly figured out what was going on with me and took the right appropriate action. I mentioned that because to this day, I still wonder what the long-term outcome was of that particular delivery. Also at the time at LA County Hospital, I wasn't aware, but there was a lawsuit underway. 10 sterilized women charged between 1971 and 74, right before my rotation, that they had been forcibly sterilized by obstetricians at the county hospital. Dr. Quilligan was reported as saying poor minority women in LA County were having too many babies, and that it was a strain on society, and that it was a good to be sterilized. They ultimately won the suit, but it was too late for obviously clinical reasons. I learned from this experience. I had in 1975 to then decide what my views were of racism in medicine. I had been confronted at 2 ends of the spectrum. One, the likely lack of access to a meaningful obstetrical experience as a medical student from Harvard at Boston Women's Lying-In Hospital versus the complete reliance of pregnant Latino women in the obstetrical skill, quote unquote, of a 3rd-year medical student at USC Women's Hospital. And they were 2 very different experiences that troubled me for my entire career, and took me away from the notion of becoming an OBGYN clinically, and took me to the career that I've had over the last 30 years, so doing a lot of activities in healthcare leadership, healthcare management, and in politics. Well, today let's advance to the year 2019-2020, where COVID-19 in racial and ethnic minority groups has become a major factor, major discussion today. We know a variety of things about COVID-19, that it's exposing vividly the issues that the communities of color have had for decades. In this particular presentation, it's the lower number of test sites coupled with significantly higher risk of morbidity and mortality for this disease. The effects are profound and are now seemingly coupled with the increasingly well-documented risk of being Black in the presence of law enforcement officers. And the overlap is real. It's the living in densely populated areas, racial residential segregation, neighborhoods further from stores, multi-generational households where it's much easier to spread to the older population. Our overrepresentation in jails, prisons, workers in essential industries. Paid sick leave is an issue. Not having health insurance, of course, is an issue. Our underlying medical conditions are an issue. And of course, the stigma and systemic inequalities. So your homework assignment for this talk is to look online. It's easy to find in the latest issue of JAMA, written by Don Berwick, The Moral Determinants of Health. I'd recommend all of you take a look. Don has thought about these issues now for a number of years, and what he concludes is that except for a few clinical preventive services, most hospitals and physicians' offices today are repair shops trying to correct the damage of causes collectively denoted as social determinants of health. And I've listed the 6 major categories: the conditions of birth and early childhood, education, work, the social circumstances of elders, a collection of elements of community resilience, such as transportation, housing, security, and a sense of community self-efficacy, and of course, fairness, which generally amounts to sufficient redistribution of wealth and income to ensure social and economic security. And then finally, Don gives you a choice. Don tells you that whether you're a first-year student or a full professor or somewhere in between, you have a choice. Honest and compassionate people may disagree about healthcare's proper role in improving social conditions, countering inequity, and fighting against structural racism. Some say healthcare should remain focused on the traditional, caring for illness, and that argument is real. And if you're at HMS, it's a phenomenal place. I loved it, and it's a wonderful place to learn all there is to know about how to put poor Humpty Dumpty back together again from his fall. But remember too that often Humpty Dumpty goes back to that same wall from which he fell. And that's why in so many cases, you'll see him back in the emergency room weeks and months later. You got to remember that there are many reasons that one can fall from that wall. Sometimes the wall collapses. Sometimes you can lose balance for a million different reasons. And sometimes you get pushed off that wall. Don said for others, he believed that he was among them. Others believe that it's important to expand the role of physicians and healthcare organizations into demanding and supporting societal reform. That's a choice that you can make as a first-year student, as a full professor, or anywhere in between. It's a choice that I made many years ago, and you've got to decide where you fit in. So what do you say? Which is your role? I've decided that for me at this stage of my career, it's running for office. In my case, for the governor of the state of Indiana, a presumably red state, where the odds of a Democrat of winning are historically low, but the odds of creating AZT to treat AIDS, and the odds of finding a way to virtually eliminate surgery for ulcers, and the odds of preventing a majority of childhood illnesses through vaccinations. They were all high odds ventures as well that were undertaken by people just like you, the students at HMS, both MD, PhD, and in other schools as well. So this is my way to celebrate the Juneteenth milestone by offering you a glimpse into my story, to my history, and to my rationale for taking the career that I've taken. You have a choice. I hope that the discussion that we're having today influences you in a way that makes it possible for you to feel proud of your contributions when you become that guy with very short hair and a lot more gray in it than in a few years, just like I've become. Thank you very much, Dean Daley and Dean Reede, for this opportunity.
Thank you, Woody. We have about 10-15 minutes for questions and dialogue. So if you have a question, there is a Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. You can submit a question that way, or you can raise your hand to speak, and we can elevate you to a panelist so you'll be able to use your microphone. And with that in mind, I'm going to ask a first question, and it says some more come in from the participants in today's session. Woody, thank you so much for sharing your history and your journey to where you are today. I'm going to ask if you can just give a little bit more of how this, or does this relate to your family and your history, because when I think about Juneteenth, I think about families. And is part of this story about your family also?
Well, my family, like most African American families, experienced slavery. My cousins and I have taken on tracing our history back. I know now that my great-great-grandfather, Arthur Myers, who participated in the Civil War and lived in Bullock County, Kentucky, was the biological son of Joseph B. Myers, who owned the slave house in the plantation in Bullock County, Kentucky, and Hillary Clara, who was one of his slaves that lived behind the house. And I remember quite vividly my aunt, who I cared for until she died at age 97, telling me the stories that had been passed down to her of what slave women would do in slavery in order to discourage often the drunken advances, sexual assaults by slave owners and their sons. It incenses me as much today when I talk about it as it did when I learned about it, but I can't imagine the pain, the angst that my ancestors experienced during that period of time. So what that means to me is that whatever feeling of being tired or being frustrated I have as I pursue the opportunities that have been made available to me in part through my work and my student leadership and other ventures at Harvard and at other places, I have no right to complain at all, zero, because I'm living on the legacy, on the work, of the pain of what they had to go through, and what I'm dealing with is nothing compared to that at all. So I feel good about the fact that I'm trying to push the ball forward, and it was my family, Joan, and thinking through what they went through in order for me to get to where I am today, that inspires me to keep moving.
Thank you. In many ways, a shared history for many of us. There is someone who's raised their hand in the Q&A, George Agapone. We could let him in. While we're waiting to let him in, he also wrote part of it out. So why don't I start with a piece of that? And Woody, given the history that you've told, your family, your time at Harvard Medical School, and what you've witnessed, why are you running for governor?
Because I'm in the fourth quarter of my career. I've done a lot of different things in healthcare and leadership, for-profit, not-for-profit, academic sector, small companies, large companies. I've learned a great deal, and I'm now of the belief that I can put all those experiences together and move my state forward. Indiana's got a lot of issues. We have, for instance, the third worst maternal mortality in the United States, the seventh worst infant mortality in the United States, and I could go on and on and on about the smoking rates, the diabetes rates, et cetera. But it's not just healthcare, because education and jobs and healthcare are intimately linked. That's what I learned as a medical student. Racism exists in many different forms and fashions, and it's very, very important for us to take those lessons and integrate them in our own way, and then decide how we want to act on them. Some of us are going to find cures for some of the diseases, or better treatments for some of the diseases that I mentioned. I wasn't the guy that was able to get the PhD and find the cure. What I was able to do was to take what I learned, articulate that in a way that helped to move policy, helped to move decisions, helped to redirect budgets, and that's what my career became about as a result of these experiences.
Thank you, Woody. George, you're now a panelist. You can raise your question.
Oh, yes. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, Dr. Myers, for giving us that history and the charge to really take up the work that you're doing. I think my question is, as a new grad who has witnessed some of these experiences that just, I would say, speak to what we have yet to do to make our society better. How do you advise? I'm starting an internship. There's a lot more work and learning I have to do. How do you advise that someone like me still maintains this, I'll say this important work in what I do daily, so keeps this voice still motivated to challenge what the problems we have in society, and balance my clinical roles with this important social role, if I may call it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I got, I think, most of the question, which is how do I advise those that have an interest in moving these problems forward, finding solutions as they make a decision about internship and residency. The first thing I will advise you all to do is do very well in your internship and residency. Learn what it takes to take good care of patients, period. That's number one. But the second thing I would tell you as well is to ask a lot of sometimes perhaps impolite, impertinent questions about things you see, things you don't understand about how people are being treated, how people are being talked to. I remember vividly sitting at the bedside, or standing at the bedside as Lou Wexler, a giant in cardiology at Harvard, at the West Roxbury VA. I remember vividly him sitting at the bedside of a patient that we couldn't help, who had bad unstable angina and heart disease, and we were at that time unable to provide a treatment that we knew was going to have a meaningful effect on his life. And I remember him sitting at that bedside, putting his hand on the hand of the patient while the family watched it, and in an elegant way explaining to him what we could do and what we couldn't do, and how we were never going to abandon him, and how we were going to treat him, and how we were going to do everything in our power to make him feel better. And I remember feeling right then at that moment, that's the kind of doctor I want to be clinically. That was Lou Wexler at the West Roxbury VA on my medicine rotation as a junior medical student. So when you get those kind of experiences, remember them, file them away, because you're going to need them as you do incredibly challenging things going forward. But that bedrock of being able to take good care of a patient using your knowledge, that's number one.
Woody, there's another question in here that's come in about how can Africans come alongside our African American brothers and sisters to fight for equality? But I want to expand that, not just Africans. How can any of us and all of us come alongside and fight together for equality?
Oh, there are just literally hundreds of ways. And what I tell folks is you'll find your way. Just keep your eyes and ears open. There's no one solution to fixing these generations of problems that we're talking about today. And there are many different avenues, many different approaches. And number one, don't give up. Find your way. Find what you're comfortable with, but really advance the ball. Don't be afraid to take good risks in your career. I got advice from many people, and one of the most important things I learned to do as a Harvard medical student is to when not to listen to a good advice, because that advice is given from a perspective of the person and his or her own experiences. You've got to reinterpret that advice with respect to where you're going to go, the experiences that you need in order to get what you think ought to be done. So Harvard Medical School is a place where you can not only be associated with some fantastic people and learn a lot of stuff, but you got to learn how to be you at the same time, and learn how not to be afraid to step out there and do something different, do something unconventional, do something that puts your career maybe at a little bit of risk. But if you're in your heart, in your gut, and in your mind, you feel that's the right thing to do, then I think you got to go for it.
I'm going to combine two questions. One was about, is it better to work inside or outside of the system? And there is another question that was really about how do we ensure, how do we address some of the issues around the lack of diversity within our faculty or among different parts of the Harvard medical or medical and scientific community, and combine them together as you think about where are those points of action to address this, and are there specific things that you think Harvard Medical School might do?
Well, that's a lot of questions, and I will try my best. The thing that you got to remember is that we are the system. And it's hard to believe that, but over time, you will be the system. You will be the people responsible for making the decisions as to where dollars are spent, what priorities are made, whether the NIH is going to put X millions of dollars into disease X or X millions of dollars into disease Y. Those are the decisions of the system. So with respect to inside or outside, it's obviously both. From wherever you are, move things forward, set yourself some goals up and push. You got to be willing to get up every morning with the idea, we're going to move the ball down the field. I know that's a sports analogy. You're not supposed to do that as much today as we did in the past, but I still believe it, that you got to move the ball down the field. You got to throw ball, catch a pass, throw a pass. You got to learn how to score points. And as we move forward, and Harvard Medical School is a great place to learn how to do that. But Harvard Medical School is imperfect. Harvard Medical School, as have many other academic medical centers, have made diversity in many cases less important than it should be. So ask the question, and I don't have the answer for you today. What are the number of interns and residents and fellows in the Harvard teaching programs, and what are they doing afterwards? Are they going into all of the fields in academic medicine and leadership or not? And if not, why not? And where are their faculty mentors? Are there sufficient number of faculty mentors today who are diverse, people of color, all from all parts of our spectrum? And if not, why not? This is 2020. We wrestled with those problems when I was HMS 77. We talked about them all the time, and we also talked about the faculty that didn't quite seem to understand that the world was a different place. Look up in the New England Journal of Medicine, a sounding board written by Professor Bernard Davis back in the 70s, where he talked about affirmative action at Harvard Medical School, and he made a quote that I still remember, of course, that the students admitted to Harvard can be associated with pilots who flunk landing in pilot school. And I was one of those students, and you can imagine how we all felt at that time. We had a big press conference. The Dean Ebert sided with us. Derek Bach, the president of the university, denounced those remarks. Dr. Davis had to retreat from them. He wasn't censured as we had asked for, but nonetheless, that was a big deal for us at the time. I don't think people are doing that. I've not heard of people saying such things today at HMS, but maybe there are other things that are being said that ought to be questioned. Use the opportunity that you have to talk to the system, because the faculty of Harvard Medical School and the people that are associated with the faculty are the system, as you will be one day.
Thank you, Woody. Excuse me, there's several questions that have come in, and as I say, set up for that, some people have raised their hand, and if you can I will ask some of the questions on the Zoom, but get prepared. David and Rebecca, and we'll call on you soon so that you can ask your question. But several have come in, and really towards Tiara, and it's in keeping with the kind of things that you just talked about, Woody. And they're asking for her to talk a little bit about tangible things that she feels as a student today, in the same way that you spoke up as a student in the past, could be done today, and particularly also around what could be done as priorities for our research labs at the medical school in this space. So let's turn to Tiara for that, and then we will come back to David and Rebecca for their questions. Tiara?
Oh, okay. Hi, everyone, again. And yeah, thank you for that question. I think this is a very complex problem, in that it's not going to be one simple answer, one simple solution that's going to solve it. And so my answer that I submit is all of the above. And so I would say to really increase diversity inclusion, to really transform how education and training, and it's not necessarily just having education and training, it's making sure the people who are doing these trainings are experts in their field and are qualified to do it. Because we have these trainings, but it's like, people come in with great intentions, but this is not their wheelhouse. This is not the work that they do. And so having these experts come in and specialists to come in and really transform and really provide that's open space for people to really grow and learn. And definitely recruitment. That's definitely recruitment, and role models definitely play another big part, as well as, you know, keeping the Black faculty here, having Black faculty and retaining them. So yeah, so I definitely say that that would be all of them top priorities. Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm hearing from you, recruitment is necessary, but it's not complete until you
Yes.
retain and maybe
Yeah.
advance and move people forward.
Yeah, I definitely, yeah, recruiting, and it's like you can't recruit someone to a space where they don't feel, you know, belong. They don't belong. They don't feel that they belong. And so that, I think, without getting all those ducks in a row, that the recruitment efforts will, you know, fall on deaf ears.
Thank you. David, please unmute. I didn't see that coming from. I'm not sure if David is still there. Rebecca?
Hi.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
Oh, hi. So I don't see my question, so I've been at HMS since 1992, and I mean, there's just no Black grad students, or so few, and I'm sorry, don't mean to say no Black students. There's so few Black students, and this isn't representative of the population. And I mean, I think it's a real problem. So anyways, I just don't know what to do about it. I think that we can actually be getting students interested, high school students. My 17-year-old daughter was dating somebody who was a Boston high school student, and they brought the kids into BU, and he loved the experience. Wound up not finishing high school, but it really made an impact on him. And I think that we can do that. And the problem is that these kids aren't 18, you know, and there's all kinds of new rules with HR. But I think, I mean, kids have, you know, just, we need to encourage kids in science, and then also like let everybody know what a PhD, what's involved in a PhD, because I think sometimes people who don't have the mentors, you know, they get in and they might think, well, it's 4 years. Well, I mean, that's not going to happen. So I don't know. It's just, I don't know. I don't have the answers.
So Woody, I'm going to ask you with that, and then I'm going to go. I have a question for our dean, Dean Daley. But as you hear about this, and I know you have been concerned with, involved with, and helped us here for a number of years as we've looked at these pipeline issues. Can you talk a little bit about how we move people into the sciences, anything that relates to this pipeline? You can't, minority faculty don't appear out of the air. What do we need to do?
There are a lot of things that we can do. The first thing is not to get discouraged and not to give up. I sensed some frustration in the voice of the woman with the recent question, and I remember that frustration. But you've got to turn that frustration into action steps. This is a marathon. It's not a sprint, but you've got to sprint within the marathon, and that means that when there is an opportunity to raise your voice appropriately, to make the comfortable uncomfortable appropriately with facts, using your knowledge of the system as it exists today, your knowledge of your own experiences, then you got to do it. There's a little voice inside of you sometimes that says, no, don't say that, don't raise that question, don't make that comment. And sometimes that voice is right, but often it's wrong. You got to listen to that little voice and then use it appropriately, learn how to use it, learn what volume to use it. And then I think you're going to find that over time you get better at using it. I think that raising the issues that you're feeling strongly about with the people that are in charge making the decisions regarding faculty and making the decisions regarding tenure is appropriate. We all know that in an academic medical center, those who do fellowships at the center or who do fellowships at similar centers are the ones that are asked to join the faculty and junior roles, and so there have to be more of them. And so that's that's a quantitative question as well as a qualitative question. Don't accept the argument. Do not accept the argument that the pipeline is insufficient. If the pipeline is insufficient, then you act on the pipeline in addition to bringing the folks that are in the pipeline in. So I've heard the arguments now quite vividly for now 30 plus years. And I've seen minimal improvement in some institutions, a lot of improvement in others. I think improvement is directly correlated with the leadership of the institution. And there are many leaders within the institution. So have an audience with those leaders. Ask them to explain to you the processes that are being used. If you've got thoughts on how to improve those processes, great. And if you yourself are in a position to consider a career in which you become the role model, then I would encourage you to do so.
Thank you, Woody. You know, there's several questions, and Woody's just referred to, of how do you speak to the leaders and how do you bring your voice there. And with that, I'd like to turn to Dean Daley. There's been a lot said today. Many questions have come through. Dean Daley, can you share some of your thoughts?
Yeah, I wish I had an hour to talk about this. This has been a trying time. I share the frustration that I heard in some of the questioners. I share the urgency as well. And I can tell you, I also endorse Woody's recommendation that we can't be complacent on any aspect of our community. And so we think and we move on doubling the space for the Med-Sci program, which brings more students of color from Boston schools into our community to inspire them for careers in healthcare and science. I think about the wonders of the Biomedical Sciences Career Program that brings over 1,000 students from underrepresented students into our community to partner them with mentors among our scientists and clinicians. I think about advocating for our Harvard medical students to stay within our system and pursue further training. I noted just this last week the fact that we had a particularly poor retention rate this year among our fourth-year Harvard Medical School graduates for pursuing their residency training within the Harvard system. And we're going to focus a laser beam on that issue and try to understand it and make it better. Over the past year, Joan and I have gone on a tour of all of our hospital affiliates and spoken directly to all of the chairs and chiefs of the departments and divisions and presented a very, very clear picture of where we are today in terms of our faculty representation and where we need to be. And just in the last few weeks, I've been working one-on-one with leadership with the aspiration of elevating 2 individuals of color in our community to division chairs positions. We recently promoted another Black faculty member to full professor. And just yesterday, I had a conversation with one of the leaders of our affiliates about the recruitment of a new chair of a major division. And I said, this is our opportunity to go out and get the most outstanding person in the country and give them a great package to come and enrich our community. So it's both a collective strategy with all of you, and I have learned a tremendous amount over the last few weeks, and I've heard you, and we are working to collate all of the great ideas to come up with the kinds of concrete steps. But it's going to continue. We've been working hard, and we're going to redouble our efforts in the coming years to make a difference. So thank you for all that you have done to educate me, and I also thank you in advance for the support that I'm going to need from all of you to make sure that we can make Harvard Medical School a more inclusive community, a better community, because we can't be excellent without being inclusive.
Thank you, George. And I want to thank everyone for attending today's breakfast. Thank you to all the people who spoke and shared your thoughts and your, I'd say, your dreams for what Harvard can be and what our nation can be. I want us to conclude today with a spoken word that's been prepared by Dr. Rhea Boyd. Rhea is a pediatrician with her master's in public health from the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. She's also an alum of the Commonwealth Fund Fellowship in Minority Health Policy at Harvard University. In closing today, Rhea.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reed, for having me. First, happy Juneteenth, y'all. And before I say the spoken word piece, I just want to say a couple of things. One, I have one living grandparent in my family, and we call her Big Mama. And she's 84 years old. And when she was a girl, she picked cotton. She was a sharecropper, which was, right, the unfreedoms that came after this emancipation. And as Tiara said at the beginning, like, we live in a number of unfreedoms right now. My Big Mama integrated her high school. She was a nurse. She started a community garden that she still eats from today, and a food pantry. And so I just want to say, before I say what I'm going to say, like, many people have said, as we face all these crises in this country, like, maybe we should leave, maybe we should go. And I want to say super clearly to everybody, this is our country, right? We built this. The freedoms we all enjoy happened on the backs of Black people. That's our inheritance as all Americans. And I intend to inherit all that my Big Mama has sown for me. This is a piece I wrote called On Freedom. Ask me about my grandmother, and I'll tell you about her hands, how they crinkled like pillows under the weight of our heads, how they fed me into womanhood and covered my future in prayer, how they carried me and cared for me and carved space for me in this world. Ask me about my mother, and I'll tell you about her side, how I fit in there, how it covered me, how warm it is, how I belong to it. Ask me about my sister, and I'll tell you about her arms, how they fought for me and pushed for me, how they stretched over me like umbrellas and under me like a swing, how they protect me. Ask me about my father, and I'll tell you about his chest, how it rises to greet me and swells to guard me and softens to hear me and hardens to support my feet in this world. This moment of freedom, this joyous occasion which we now celebrate, this freedom that was carried down to the shores of Texas on the back of our nation's patriots, this freedom was not granted. It was taken by hands like my grandmother's and from sides like my mother's. This freedom was lifted in arms like my sister's and floated on chests like my father's. Ask me about this freedom, and I'll tell you about the people who have nourished me and guided me, protected me, and prayed for me, and loved me into this time now, into this freedom here. This freedom was sown in the long nights of darkness by the wise people who knew joy, oh joy, always comes in the morning. I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. Hallelujah. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhea. Thank you all for being with us today. A day for reflection, a day for sharing, a day for community, a day for remembering where we have been, but always looking at where we need to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan, and to all of the speakers that make us so proud.